Entrepreneurship Month is the world's largest celebration of innovators and job creators who launch, invest in bringing their ideas to life through their businesses, driving economic growth, and most times achieving social impact. During this month of November, the IDC, Industrial Development Corporation, is taking this opportunity to celebrate and acknowledge Mzansi's entrepreneurs while also educating them on how to take their businesses to the next level and access funding opportunities. IDC is a self-financing entity, and contrary to some assumptions, they do not receive any funding from the National Treasury, which means its business model and financing activities sustain its operations. And today we are going to have a discussion with Naomi Mtshali, who's acting head, small business finance and regions, about entrepreneurship in particular. Hello, Naomi. How are you?
Good evening, Tabitha. I'm good, thanks. And you, and good evening to the power listeners.
Thank you so much. So I've touched a bit on what you guys do, but I think it's important on you just, touching, I suppose, or adding on some of the aspects. Who is the IDC? What is its role in our economic and social transformation trajectory in general?
No, great. Thanks a lot for having the IDC on your show. So the IDC is 83 years old. We turned 83 in October. We are a self-financing, as you indicated, state-owned development finance institution whose mandate is really to foster economic development. We do this by promoting sustainable industrial development in order to contribute to the growth and development of various sectors of our economy. We focus on productive sectors, which I might touch on later. We also facilitate transformation, Tabiso, of the local economy by bringing previously disadvantaged groupings into the mainstream economy. And this is done through funding viable, sustainable, and transformational businesses that are able to create jobs and also demonstrate the ability to repay the loans that we provide to them. Through the industry insights that we have gained through the years, we also help in the implementation of various government policies. And I think critically for us is to ensure that the implementation of the various sector master plans that are drawn up by the DTIC, to whom we report, are implemented. A critical attribute, Tabitha, of the IDC is its appetite for risk. We tend to focus on and fund sectors that traditional lenders tend to shun. And it's really because we have patient capital, and as the results of our financial results have shown, we have a very strong balance sheet through which we can take this risk.
Let's talk about who you fund. I mean, which sectors of the economy are you funding? And let's talk also about eligibility of funding from the IDC.
Yes, we have about 9 sectors. We went through a realignment project 2.5 years ago, where we combined certain sectors, through looking at what really worked well. So the sectors that we fund will be your agro-processing, your services, and services entails your tourism, your ICT, healthcare, and it also includes media and audiovisual. We also fund the energy sector, and the country facing a crisis from an energy perspective. This unit is really crucial and critical to ensure that we provide funding to businesses that can demonstrate that they can provide alternative sources of energy. We also finance the chemical, medical, and industrial products unit. We also have infrastructure. This is where infrastructure builds. The unit that focuses on the likes of your Transnet, your port infrastructure, your road infrastructure, your rail infrastructure. This is the unit that's responsible for that. We also finance the textiles and wood products sector, the machinery, equipment, and electronics sector as well. We have the automotive and transport equipment, as well as one of the big ones, which is the mining and metals. You indicated that I'm acting head of small business. So the small business unit itself operates across the IDC sector. So we are sector agnostic, and we fund from $1 million up to 20 million. Anything that is above the threshold, we then refer to these business units, that services the sectors I've just highlighted. In terms of who is eligible for funding, I think our criteria is R1 million. And so businesses that seek funding above R1 million, businesses that operate within the sectors that I've just highlighted, and businesses that really can demonstrate that they have the ability to service, the funding that we have advanced to them. So anybody in South Africa who meets the criteria of the IDC, noting we have sister DFI that provide funding, for the requirements of below R1 million. So our minimum is R1 million. And we don't necessarily have a maximum, but when it goes to higher levels, then we prefer to partner and co-fund with other funding institutions. So essentially, that's who we fund and the sectors that we fund.
Yeah. So it's also interesting to note that while yourselves as the IDC are a government entity, but you are fully self-sustaining. And there's this underlying perception, though, that the IDC funds only connected businessmen. What's your response to that?
I think you have rightly put it. It is a perception, but I think it's important that we not nullify or dilute that perception. And so we're glad that you're giving us this opportunity to address that, because people's perceptions then become their reality. So in terms of who the IDC is and how we fund, we are open to fund any viable business plan that is submitted to us. So one of the key criteria for us that we consider when funding is economic viability. So when Thabiso applies for funding to the IDC, what we will determine is whether you're within mandate or not. So we will not interrogate your status. We will not interrogate your affiliation, but the capacity of the business to facilitate creation of sustainable jobs. But more importantly, Thabiso, to generate sufficient revenue to be able to service the debt that has been extended. So I think the notion or the perception that IDC funds, well-connected business people, it is misplaced. And it might be because, when there are coverages in the media, then the coverage focuses on large transactions because those are strategic in nature, and they might give that wrong perception. But certainly, the fact that we had a small business financing unit, and regions unit, tells you that we also fund small, medium enterprises, and we fund from startups, to expansion.
So then the question becomes, how does a business ensure that they are funding ready, and what does it take to qualify for funding?
So I think we weigh every business plan that comes to us on its own merit. As I indicated, we will then determine whether it falls within mandate. If it is within mandate, then we determine does it show viability? And I spoke about startups. So there is a method in which we determine the viability of startups, and this is to ensure that the businesses that we fund are able to repay us, but also to withstand the competitive environment in which we operate. So let's say, for instance, the business it's a new product that they're introducing. Mm-hmm. What we would look for is the applicant to have some form of letters of intent or offtake agreements. And we know that as startups, it's very difficult for startups to really procure offtake agreements. But then letters of intent at least give us an indication of the potential of the product to be taken by the market. What we will then do is assess the strength of the letters of intent. Who has provided these letters of intent? Is it strong businesses that will be able to pay for the products that they will be ordering from you as an entrepreneur? So if these answers are these questions that we asked during our initial assessment, then we will start to do our own due diligence. And this is really an extensive process which interrogates the numbers. It speaks to the customers that have been highlighted, the suppliers of raw materials, suppliers of equipment. We determine whether the lease that you're paying is fair or not. So it's a very, very detailed process that entrepreneurs go through, before IDC can then disburse or provide funding. So the fact that we are 83 years old and still self-financing speaks to the fact that we really aim to finance responsibly. And hence we undertake this due diligence.
Yeah. Then take us through your typical credit assessment process. I mean, up to the stage where the IDC finally disperses to an applicant. And how long does this process usually take?
The perennial question of how long it takes. We have what we call an initial assessment. This is where the merit of the application is considered in line with our criteria. So should the application then be within our criteria, that meets within our criteria, the team that conducts the initial assessment will then present this to the relevant forum. And if the forum sees merit, then this transaction will proceed to what we call a due diligence. And this is where the due diligence is where the team spends really a long time, and perhaps this is what creates the perception that IDC takes long. Because the time we spend is to make sure that the team understands the business model of the client. We represent the client well when we go to present to our various committees. So this is really where the time is spent engaging the client to understand the business model, unpack all the pertinent issues and the challenges, that this business might face. The risk areas. What are the risk areas? How do we address or how do we assist the client to mitigate those risks? And so once that is packaged by the team, it is presented to the different credit committee. And once the committee deems the transaction to have merit and to show viability, they will approve it. Approval means the client still has to meet some suspensive conditions, and the conditions are really on a case-by-case basis as well, and industry-by-industry perspective. Once the client meets all the criteria, all the suspensive conditions, then we can disburse the funds, and that client becomes an IDC client. In terms of how long it takes, what we have observed is you can't really apply a paintbrush effect to all your transactions or applications. So we have segmented, transactions in terms of whether what we call vanilla transactions, which means there are no complexities, there are no significant risks or challenges being identified. So those, one will find they take less time. They might take up to, I think, 2 to 3 months. And really it's because IDC invests for sustainability. We're not a very fast lender. We lend on the basis of the strength of the balance sheet of our clients. But more complex transactions obviously will take much, much longer because the team has to satisfy itself, that it has addressed as many of the risks identified in the transactions as possible.
Yeah. With the economy being what it is, I mean, what happens if I as a business default on my loan repayments and my business has hit the rough seas, as it were? And this is happening now and then. The entrepreneurs will tell you about, the troubled times that they have to navigate around. How does the IDC then go about recovering its investment?
It certainly is a challenging time. I think notwithstanding, the impact of COVID, the impact of floods that we have seen, the impact of the public unrest that we have seen. So it definitely is a challenging time for business. However, we consider ourselves to be providers of patient capital. What that means is, and I spoke about how we take time to ensure that by the time we invest, the chances of success of our investment is very high. So essentially what we do, we handhold. You apply to us, your business hits a speed bump. We're not necessarily going to go to business rescue. That's a last resort for us. So what we do, we have a department called Customer Support and Growth. Once you're an IDC client, this is the team that really monitors and manages proactively the funds and the loans that we have provided. So they provide value creation plans for our clients to make sure that they identify speed bumps proactively. So what we can also do is provide you with a capital moratorium. We can restructure the facilities. We also have a department called Business Advisory and Turnaround, with an emphasis on turnaround. So before we go to legal action, business rescue, that team is comprised of specialists that can look at how best to turn around the business. What are the key drivers, that can make this business turn around? Obviously, the last resort then would be to go to business rescue, but we really handhold our clients, and hence we call them business partners, because we see this as a partnership as opposed to just a lender and a borrower.
Just as a parting shot, what would your advice be to an aspiring entrepreneur who is actively seeking funding from the IDC?
Yeah, I think what is important is, that the funding applications are in writing, firstly, and they have to be accompanied by a comprehensive business plan. So what we do in the IDC, there are 4 key aspects of a business plan that we look at, and these are the financial aspects. And in there, we look at, so the entrepreneur needs to indicate how much funding is required, what the funding is going to be used for, what is the owner's contribution as well towards the funding. So within the financial aspect, we also require financial projections. And in the financial projections, there are 3 fundamental elements that should be covered or that should be provided, which is your income statement, your balance sheet, your cash flow, demonstrating also how the loans will be repaid. The second aspect is the marketing aspect. Here is where the entrepreneur needs to really explain how the revenues or the sales will be generated, how the products will be marketed, and how the distribution, of the products will happen. The key question that a funder, look or want answers for are who will buy the product, why they will buy it, and most importantly, how will you get to them? This is really it in a nutshell, is the marketing strategy. The third one is the technical aspect. This is where the entrepreneur needs to indicate where the business will be operating from. What are the lease terms? Where applicable, the regulatory or statutory or legislatively, if there are any licenses or documents that need to be, or agreements that need to be obtained, these have to be indicated. The equipment suppliers, the raw material suppliers as well, who they are, where are they based? Because then we need to determine whether we need to hedge for currency fluctuations or not. In terms of the fourth aspect is the management, and this is really very important. Entrepreneurs need to indicate who is on the management team. To consider the structure of that management team and the role of the entrepreneur, because as entrepreneurs, sometimes what we see is entrepreneurs being the CEO, the marketing person, the financial person, and this really, I think, has an impact on them being able to really drive the business. So it's important to have a good and supportive management team that can really assist, take the business forward.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Naomi. We really appreciate your time as always.
Thank you so much for having us. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much.